Hello, you textual deviants, and welcome to another edition of Texting with me, Tomek, in St. Petersburg.
And with me, Mark Will in Taipei. How are you today, Tomek?
I'm doing well. I've just had an espresso to ensure that you get the best version of me.
And what's our topic today, Tomek?
Well, Mark, our topic is another request. It's by a fellow Tom, actually, since that's the white man's name that I take when I'm at work, so that I can get the British native speaker's salary. Um,
Instead of
yeah,
the Slavic Tomek,
exactly.
that you would
So,
be paid less if you use that
well, I do use Tom
moniker.
strategically, like in my CVs and so on, so that I can make sure that
Mm-hmm.
they consider me a proper Englishman.
Right.
But that's a whole
Well,
other
you don't
issue.
sound
So
like a Brit. You sound like a dirty Yank.
it's true. I'm gradually eradicating my American accent and my American spellings. Even quotation marks are different. Did you know that? Like they use the single quotation mark rather than the double.
Of course.
I didn't know. I'm learning these things this year as I teach the Cambridge curriculum for the first time. But anyway, let's get into the topic. Enough banter. We've wasted
Enough
30
banter,
seconds.
Tomek.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So, we're going to be discussing. This is quite interesting how this request came about in a way, right? Because
I don't know
I've,
the story, so
yeah, well,
fill me in.
I've introduced the podcast to a few selective colleagues. I'm doing that carefully, kind of one at a time. Once I really feel like, okay, this person is on my level, they're not going to disclose the links to people who shouldn't be hearing it, and I can keep my profile separate from work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, so Tom is the latest guy I've brought into the fold. He really enjoyed our last pod about ChatGPT and AI and so on. Anyway, so you obviously remember that Aiden, a fellow colleague, is behind the request for the This Is England episode. And then in a separate conversation, I think Tom listened to that. And then he asked me, oh man, if you like gritty British films, you got to watch Dead Man's Shoes. And I said, well, I'll definitely feel more compelled to do so if it's an official request for our show. And he said, yes, it's now a request. I want to hear what you guys think about it. And I guess, in a way, for me, the most interesting thread among all this is the fact that neither knew that Shane Meadows was behind both films. So it's
Oh,
like,
really?
right, yeah. So
So they
Tom
they
didn't
were
know,
just they were just fans of the genre, like the gritty kitchen sink realism,
right?
but they didn't realize it was the same director.
Exactly, and they didn't. So they were fans of this particular film, right? So they were fanboys of like This Is England, and now Tom with Dead Man's Shoes. And but it works quite well, I think, for us to kind of go deeper into the filmography of Shane Meadows, who, again, before This Is England, I think neither of us knew much about either, right?
I had never heard of him, and I had not heard of either film, but I enjoyed both of them. So I'm
Yeah,
glad that um I appreciate the introduction to his work.
right. I think these films are much more seminal for British people, and kind of maybe they're like rite of passage
Like you,
films.
Tomek.
Exactly. But no, but I'm just saying, if we were Brits, if we had grown up in the UK, I'm sure that these films would have been important for us. They would have been crucial counterculture films. I'm not saying that they necessarily represent counterculture, but they would have been those movies that are like, that's a cool movie to watch. It would have been. It's in a way, there's like a dude aspect to these films as well, right?
Well, is it fair to say that there's a Tarantino vibe? I mean, is Shane Meadows like a British Tarantino?
I don't know. I think
Can we make
it's
that analogy? I had that feeling while watching this one when I was listening to the dialogue. I mean, of course, they're quite different styles in many ways, but the dialogue reminded me of Tarantino. It's kind of like uh, witty, entertaining uh, speech uttered by these thuggish characters, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I think in that sense, it's a worthwhile comparison. I wouldn't put the dialogue in this film at the same level as like a Tarantino film. I don't think it's like as clever or witty. I think it has some
Well, it's
moments
more.
that are
It
funny, but
seems more. It seems more impromptu, less scripted. But I'm just talking about entertainment value. You know, like uh, these. As we find out, the longer we watch the film, these characters are pretty reprehensible. You know, uh,
yeah,
but especially in the beginning, we're amused by them, aren't we? I think they're entertaining to listen to.
yeah. And I watched with subtitles, despite being the British representative on our show,
Mm-hmm.
just because I didn't want to miss too much of the dialogue. Just a really quick continuation on the Tarantino idea. Like when I was describing the film to someone today, I said some people call it a slasher film, and they didn't really know what a slasher film was. So I crudely defined it as something like Freddy Krueger. Um, I don't know if that was a good comparison, but I don't know. I kind of feel like the word he said. Oh, you mean like Blade? And it wasn't not necessarily that literal, but yeah, if we look at it as a slasher film, there are elements of like Kill Bill violence, but I just said that it's much less stylized and much less sort of like violence as performative, and it's heavier, right? It's heavier violence in this film.
Well, the violence reminds me. Maybe I should save this for later, but since it came up, I'll just mention it now. Uh, in terms of the violence, I was reminded of the scripts and the films of screenwriter and director Paul Schrader. Um, he is the uh, person who wrote Taxi Driver, for
Okay.
example,
Mm-hmm.
and he also directed the Mishima biopic, Mishima Life in Four Chapters. You know, there and oh, he wrote the original screenplay for Rolling Thunder, uh, which have you seen that?
No.
That's from the 70s. That's actually a Tarantino favorite. He even named one of his production companies Rolling Thunder Pictures or something like that. So it's with William Devane and Tommy Lee Jones, and they're both Vietnam vets who come back uh, to the States after being in like a POW camp for many years, and they can't adjust to society, and they uh, you know find themselves mixed up with some unsavory characters, and then there's a bloodbath at the end. So in these Paul Schrader films, there are others I'm not thinking of right now, but there's often like and Tarantino too, maybe there's like cathartic violence,
Right.
which reminds you. You may have said something in a text about Greek tragedy, or like
I
a
said
hemming.
Shakespeare.
Okay, Shakespeare, or like a sometimes in Hemingway too. There's like what's called purifying violence. It's like a cathartic
Right. I thought of the
violence.
word catharsis with this too.
Yeah, and interestingly, I didn't do any research after watching This Is England, but I did after watching Dead Man's Shoes. I did do a bit of browsing online about Shane Meadows, and apparently this is after I had the thought of Paul Schrader. He apparently awarded Paul Schrader some honor, like at an award show or something, and
Interesting.
maybe he said some words about the influence of his work. So I think there's some validity to that connection.
Yeah, I mean the taxi
But
driver.
the
I didn't
the
think of it, but I feel it when you say it. Like I feel a similar energy. I mean, obviously, we would see the character, the Richard character, as ostensibly more noble, but in some way, they both
well,
feel like they're purveyors of justice, and they're maybe one is just more deluded than the other. And that's
well,
there's
and
so many themes I want us to jump into. Let me just do a quick intro, yeah, because I
well,
realized we
let me
forgot.
before you do that, I'll just point out that this is what's happening in Rolling Thunder too, and I think the military uh, aspect of this character of Richard is key. I mean, what is a soldier but a trained killer, right? And so when they come back from war, um, how can we reasonably expect them to integrate into society? Like what they're supposed to just turn it off,
Right.
but it doesn't always work that way. And so in Rolling Thunder, for example, we see the difficulty that vets have, adjusting to life in so-called civilized society. And again,
Mm.
that's a Hemingway theme as well. But
Yeah, I want
carry
us to
on.
explore that topic. No, absolutely. So, really quick introduction. We are 12 minutes in. Dead Man's Shoes, everybody. If you haven't watched it, and we highly recommend you do, and then come back and listen to the show. Unless you just like hearing our soothing voices as you're going to sleep and just helps you regardless of what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Now you've thrown them off. Now they're like going to wake up again. This is supposed to be like soothing lullaby ASMR stuff.
That's
Um,
right, Tomek.
Dead Man's Shoes is a 2004 British psychological thriller film. Even that's contentious, right? Because I want us to talk about the genre labeling maybe a bit later, but this is the wiki entry. Directed by Shane Meadows and starring Paddy Considine, both of whom co-wrote the film with Paul Fraser. The film also stars Toby Kebbell, or Cabell, in his first film appearance. I think he went on to be quite successful, so that's quite significant that Meadows is giving him his debut, and I can even talk about that a bit later. It was released in the UK on the 1st of October 2004, and then I've got a one-sentence summary. A disaffected soldier returns to his hometown to get even with the thugs who brutalized his mentally challenged brother years ago. Um,
I recognized Toby Kebbell, or however his surname is pronounced. Um, he was in an episode of Black Mirror, which we
that's
mentioned.
right. Yeah,
We didn't mention that particular episode, but we mentioned the show Black Mirror in our AI episode, which dropped last week. And yeah, he was in the one called
the entire history of you.
The Entire History of You. Yeah,
One of my favorite episodes, actually.
yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one.
Back
And
when Black Mirror was really strong, in its initial, I think it's the first season, and when I think it was maybe at its best. I'm not saying it's like suffered a huge drop off, but I'm just saying the first few episodes were relentless. They were just,
mm-hmm.
you know, they were trying to be
they
hard.
were they were pig fucking good.
Exactly. uh, so there's a lot to talk about.
That's not an endorsement of bestiality or zoophilia, textual deviance. So don't get the
Yeah,
wrong idea.
there's a lot to talk about, and I think the film may even be more interesting as a discussion trigger than as a viewing experience for some
Okay.
people like me, especially who don't really love watching too much violence. So
Well, what was your reaction as you watched it? I described it to you as another punch in the gut. The first punch in the gut being, "This is England." Dead Man's Shoes might be even a harder punch in the gut,
I would
or
agree
a
with that.
or a kick in the balls, or a kick in the teeth. I mean, it's a heavy dose, as they say.
Yeah, and it's much more
Hard to take.
concentrated on violence and specifically just this spree, this murder spree, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas This Is England, you get a lot more light. What's the term when they call it? Like not comic relief, but you know, you get a lot more air and a lot more different types of contexts, different types of scenes.
Well, as I say, there are elements of that in the beginning, at least, but of Dead Man's Shoes.
Yeah.
But it around I have a timestamp. I think it was around 25 minutes in that it began to take a very dark turn
Hmm.
when we see the flashback with the sexual abuse or the threat of sexual abuse, and after that, the it just keeps getting darker, and the I don't know, the uh uncomfortable feeling that we as viewers have is, amped up considerably.
Yeah, I apparently all of the murders, I think there's about 6 or 7 in total, they take place within a 20-minute span of the film. Um but one of the first scenes is that kind of bar scene, right? Where Richard first encounters or interrogates Herbie. And we get the word which we spent quite a bit of time discussing in a previous episode. So
What
that
word is
makes its
that?
appearance. At you, you cunt! That was the exact quote.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's a great scene because and it took me by surprise because at first Richard seems diffident, almost uh I don't know, shy, or he's like sorry, like apologetic. And then when you say Herbie is his name, says, "What the fuck you looking at?" or whatever. Yeah, and then he reacts the way you just did. But you saw that, right? The instant transformation. Like he's nice and polite and
But the nice is like
almost
him, it's
apologetic.
not genuine, right?
Of course, but that's what's so shocking
Yeah,
about it. And
sure.
that's what's so menacing about him as a character, because he's like, you don't see this menace coming at you. It's a surprise, right? Like he seems very calm. He's smiling. He's
He has a
joking.
very
He's
sweet face.
he's playing jokes, like it
He's
in
very
the
mild. He's very soft spoken when he wants to
soft
be, as you said,
spoken when he wants to be. And then there,
and a sweet face. Yeah. So
yeah,
I keep saying
there's
that.
that scene where he's like, I have you in the palm of my hand, or whatever,
Right. That's
and
apparently like one of the most infamous scenes in the movie.
he's just like calmly explaining that, and then we see that it's a psychopathic killer that's
Right.
saying this.
Right. All right. So coming back just to give some sort of structure to this. So you said that you just mentioned that your reaction is like the gut punch. My reaction was it wasn't as like violent as I worried it would be, just because whenever somebody gives you like a disclaimer that which I got before this film that this is going to be rough, so I kind of was prepared for real brutality, and I guess I've been numbed to some degree just by how dark some films can be. So it wasn't like the darkest film I'd ever seen or something. Like it didn't. I was able to watch it, but it just didn't necessarily make me happy just because of the kind of tone. And so my crude reaction at the end is like interesting, not my cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. And the positive to that is just that I was eager to talk about it, and so in that sense, it was successful. I didn't feel it was boring. I didn't think it was like the most intellectually stimulating film I'd ever seen either, in terms of like how the plot developed. I didn't feel like it was that, that creative. There was some like predictability about it, but it was still like well done, well acted, and I think some of the more interesting discussions we're going to have are going to be around ideas of good, bad, heroism, nobility. Um, so we're probably
Let's
not going to
start
do
with
any.
that. Let's
Let
start
me.
with
Can I
that.
start? Can I start? I want to start with one that I think is maybe like the most interesting, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So I was watching an interview with Shane Meadows, and we're not going to bother with much plot summary, right? People can watch
Fine.
the movie. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just saying because we have followed a plot summary structure before, but I don't know how useful it'll be. So this I found really interesting. I think the divide that I've noticed in the critical consensus, like the because it has a 55% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, so you can see that it's very much like a film that people love or don't like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but my guess, and from what I'm reading, is that people split along the lines of seeing the violence as excessive and gratuitous versus satisfying and like moral, and like kind of. So I see some people as watching this and like getting really like gratified, yeah, by justice being served
Oh, I don't
and
think so.
getting off on that. Well, let me
Mm,
just finish then. Let me just finish with a little quote from Shane Meadows, which I don't know if he called this a film about human justice, justice of the heart. Very strange to hear that in a way, right?
mm-hmm.
So I don't even know. Like we would say we should separate the author from the text. So in a way, regardless of if that's Shane Meadows' view of the film, which would sort of be like an endorsement of Richard in a way, whereas I've seen a lot of takes that are much more like focused on how troubled Richard is and like how much he's basically a psychotic who's
Yeah.
hearing Anthony's voices in his head. All right, I'll let you
Well,
talk.
okay. Well, um,
But that idea of justice of
that
the heart, that's
I
such a weird
understand,
phrase. Okay.
or maybe we could say human justice. You see, this reminds me of the first line. He says, "What? God will forgive them. They'll get into heaven, but I cannot accept that."
Yeah, I can't
So
live
it's
with
the
that.
I can't live with that. So it's the difference between divine justice and human justice. God may forgive you, but I never will. You know,
And criminal justice as
or
well, right? I mean, because the fact is the law hasn't provided it either.
mm-hmm,
So I would say if you wanted
yeah,
to add that third category. But go on.
yes, yeah, sure. Well, I mean, so I think we can accept that idea without necessarily being like satisfied with the character of Richard, whose name I didn't even catch until like I don't know, almost an hour in. I just heard he was Anthony's brother. I don't even know if his name was mentioned. I didn't
It
catch it
was for
until
sure.
later. Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
just heard Anthony's brother. Maybe it was the accent or dialect that I had trouble following, but I kept hearing Anthony's brother. So that added to the mystery of him and his background. I mean, from the jacket, maybe I could have guessed he was ex-military, but I didn't at the time. It just looked like the '90s style of clothing among a certain class of people in Britain. With
Yeah.
they looked like Oasis basically with their fucking track suits and the you know sneakers and whatnot. But I, what I'm saying is, I don't think we have to see him as either psychotic or morally justified avenging angel. I think we can see him as kind of anti-hero, like like you know Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, for example. The
Or the
we
Joker.
yeah, or the Joker. I mean, which and the Joker, the new Joker, the Joaquin Phoenix Joker. That's like
Right.
a throwback to these films with anti-heroes of the 70s. You know, like now it seems the trend is for these fucking comic book superheroes who are representatives of good fighting the forces of evil. It's all cartoonish. There's no nuance. But here we have these flawed anti-heroes that, okay, we understand on some level why they're doing what they're doing, but uh it we're not entirely comfortable with it, right? There's something about it that is troubling. That's good.
Absolutely.
I like that kind of narrative. I don't like the cartoon characters. I don't like simple tales of good and evil.
I agree with your take completely. I guess I'm just saying I wanted to focus more on the audience reaction to it, So, like, I watched this YouTube review with these three dudes sitting on a couch who are all huge fans of this film, and you could tell that the thing that drove their enjoyment was yeah, he's getting them back. These fucking asshole thugs, like they just got a lot of they were getting high off of that, and so I almost
Well,
feel like this speaks to like certain maybe people who were bullied or people who
yes.
felt like the
Well,
underdog. But I'm saying I'm a bit wary of that type of reaction because I feel like
but what
it's a bit
can't it be?
base.
But can't it? It is, but can't it be both? It's a very natural human reaction, and the more we find out about what these people did, especially Sonny, right? Like Sonny is the um, combo character in this film, right? We can
Right, right.
we can make that analogy, like combo in This Is England, the kind of charismatic uh, thug uh, bully that weaker males want to be accepted by, right? So they succumb to the peer pressure and go along with him, even though they're not all like on board and not sure it's right. And one character in particular is very dubious about the whole thing. The character named
Yeah,
Mark, by the way, but
right.
we can talk about him later. Um, but when we find out, you know, what he has done, and he was the ringleader, and what he subjected Anthony to, then we don't. I personally don't feel a lot of sympathy for him, but then I worry about what Richard is doing to himself. Like, okay, there's satisfaction in you know seeing those bullies get their comeuppance, but what does it do to you? What does it do to your soul if you're the one who exacts vengeance? It's
Hmm.
like the argument against capital punishment, which I heard Sister Helen Prejean uh, give. You know, um, it's like Dead Man Walking, the Susan Sarandon
I
Sean
haven't
Penn
seen it, but I'm
film.
aware of it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's based on a true story. This nun became the spiritual counselor of this young man who committed these murders, and she was opposed to the death penalty, and one of the arguments that was thrown at her was, but he murdered these people, he deserves to die. And her response was, yes, but do we deserve to kill him?
Hmm.
Well, that's a
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
a
That's interesting. That's for sure interesting. You know, I think I have a lot more sympathy for all humans, so I'm not even into the idea that like obviously that someone deserves to die. Um but I'm just saying, and I just
Well,
want to ask you, wait, let me just ask you just directly then, like people whose main enjoyment of the film are like I characterized it.
mhm.
How do you feel about that particular reaction
I mean,
to the film?
I can't tell people how to react or what to feel.
No, but
It's
no, but
perfectly, to me, it's perfectly understandable, and I sympathize with that point of view. But at the same time,
but isn't that kind of like exploiting violence in a sense
yes,
then like
yes, but again, it's not either or. It's not like that is the correct interpretation and that is the way to view this film. It's like I can experience that as I'm watching it. I can feel that on a certain level. There's kind of an Old Testament eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth justice that's being exacted. But then there's like a New Testament interpretation, I guess you could say, like, you know, love your enemies, because if you retaliate, you're really only harming yourself.
and what
If
I'm trying to
you
say is like I am contemptuous of that particular reaction.
which
The reaction, not yours. I mean the one that is like, oh, I loved it when it felt so good when he blah 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 when he told those guys who's boss, like when he stood up to those assholes. Like I just like I'm a bit cynical about that
Well, I
experience
think
of the
it's
film.
simplistic.
Okay,
I feel the same way. I like when people stand up to bullies. I like when uh, people speak truth to power. I like when
yeah, but
the
it's too
underdog.
easy.
I'm on the side of the underdog and the weak and the oppressed. I like it when they
Me
stand up for
too. Me
themselves and fight
too.
back. But the problem is, at some point, the exploited can become the exploiter, or the bullied can become the bully, or the abused can become the abuser.
I'm just
And
saying that I think it's just an easy reaction that I resent that type of reaction. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like it's a bit too
well, I
like
don't
you're
have the
feeding
same
you the
feeling.
pathos.
I
Okay,
don't
well that's me. I don't
I
want to be
don't
fed my pathos
I
in
don't
that to that degree.
I don't resent it, because I think it's a natural human reaction. That's why a film like this and those others that we mentioned affect us. I mean, think of all the.
But they didn't affect me the same way though. That's my point. It didn't
I
affect
mean,
me as
think
the
of
same
think
way as
of
those guys
think
on the
of
couch.
think of okay, not in the same way, but we talked about Scarface, and uh, the way that character, on a certain level, we sympathize with him and understand him, but we're more and more horrified by his behavior the longer we watch the film, and the
And
deeper.
but we're able to see him in a parodied way that maybe Richard. I just don't want Richard to become some kind of like folk hero because for me he's not, and that's like silly if he. I mean, I don't want to be too dismissive of if that's a person's experience. Fair enough, but I don't. I'm not into that. So yeah. Um,
Well, okay, he's not a folk hero. Is he a legitimate anti-hero?
can I read you a tiny excerpt from a review?
Well, are you going to
This
answer
is
that question, or is that
an anti-hero.
is the reading of the review a response to the question? Because, all right, think of it another way. I use the phrase "avenging angel," and there is kind of a religious vibe to this film, which is maybe heightened by the trippy psychedelic scenes, and the whole, like, as we find out towards the end of the film, you know, basically three-fourths of it was hallucinatory. Like, it wasn't even real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what are you talking about in terms of Anthony being an illusion,
Yeah,
being fake
yeah. So
news?
that
Yeah,
so it gave like a dreamlike quality to the whole film, and it made it easier to interpret it as a kind of allegory, almost a religious allegory. But okay, let's take that phrase avenging angel. You know, what is an angel? An angel, or sorry, an angel is a messenger, right? But a fallen angel, it becomes a devil, right? And remember, during after he uh, spikes the tea with the drugs, and then they're all tripping out. I'm talking about Richard, right? And they're all tripping out, and he confronts them and fucks with them. And one of them, I don't remember his name, says, "Are you the devil or Jesus?" Remember that?
right, right, yeah,
And
yeah.
so that again,
That was Saws, by the way.
okay. So again, that phrase came to mind. You know, avenging angel. Like, if he is the devil, we have to remember that the devil is a fallen angel. So there's some ambiguity there, um, and again, that's the nuance. There's not that cartoonish good and evil vibe.
Okay, I want to come back to something, an idea that I have. Like this is coming up from our conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's there are people, men in particular, who are moral or they try to be moral, but they feel an attraction to violence. Okay, and so for this class of people, like if they can find a moral purpose, then they can be violent and like indulge in it, and that's like that's what I see as that's what I'm critical of here. That it's like
But I think the film recognizes that, like, especially at the end, that scene with Richard and Mark, we learn a lot of things. Like, for one thing, Richard confesses that he was embarrassed by his brother Anthony,
yeah, yeah. I think that's critical scene.
and so I mean, he also says he loves him, but it's almost like he he did all of these things out of a sense of guilt, like he didn't protect him. He should have protected him, so this is his way of honoring his memory, or maybe he's defending the honor of his family, or maybe it's just maybe it was all just an excuse to commit this violence, right? Because remember, he says, now I'm the fucking monster, I'm the fucking beast, or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm kind of maybe getting at is that it's in a way for me this violence is less about justice and more like an expression of his ego. You know.
Well, I think you can read it that way, but again, I what makes it more powerful to me is the ambiguity of it all and the ambivalence we feel. It's like that Russian film about the healer that we watch,
Hmm.
and she's also a disgusting alcoholic, right? So it's we don't have to choose. Like, what how do I mean, that's the term anti-hero itself expresses that ambiguity, right? It's like,
Pugalo, by the way. Pugalo.
yes, yes,
Sorry.
scarecrow.
Yes.
But the term anti-hero has that ambivalence or that ambiguity, you know.
Bro, I agree with everything you're saying. I'm just saying then when I hear this interview and like Shane Meadows is saying this is justice of the heart, I'm like it's a little cringy.
Well, do you know about his uh, biographical details because I learned something.
I learned some stuff too, but
He
can I still read
himself,
this? Let me read this. Can I read this quote really quick that I wanted to read earlier?
carry
Come
on.
on, man. This is all right. So, uh, this is a critical quote, and like I don't necessarily agree with it either, but I just think it's part of the conversation that's worth bringing up. So this is from David Walsh, the World Socialist website.
Mm-hmm.
Meadows fails to grasp that while his stated theme may be the senselessness of the atrocities, he all too obviously revels in organizing the bloodshed. The overall effect of the film is to glorify the carnage. One is confronted here with an extraordinary level of artistic and social unconsciousness.
Well, I
It's just,
mean, this reminds me of your comment about war movies. You said, I mean, you were quoting someone else,
yeah, I
but you
was
said
quoting someone, right?
there's no such thing as an anti-war movie because when you're
Right.
showing the violence, you're glorifying it. I think that came up in the context of our Scarface episode, right? Like,
That's right.
you
That's right.
know, there's no anti-gangster film because
Right.
when you're
Exactly.
showing it, you're
It all has that element of glamour.
yeah, but that's
Same
a
with rap music.
but that's an oversimplification. Oh, you mean
I
like
agree.
gangster rap or
Yeah, or like life about how that they're out of that struggle, but they're
thug
kind of
life
using
and
that. Yeah, and like or the way the white kids will just
I
enjoy
mean,
that when they're whereas at the same time it's supposed to be cautionary, but it like
yeah, I mean, I think that's an oversimplification, but I it's also valid, Like
yeah, I just wanted to add it, add it to the conversation. But
I
go
think
on.
that's fine. Well, do you know that Shane Meadows was himself sexually molested by an older boy?
No, I didn't know that.
That I saw that in a Guardian interview. He recently, you know, shared that story publicly. He had
Okay.
forgotten about it and suppressed it, and it came out in some therapy. So, you know, after I read about that, I thought back to the scene with Sonny and Anthony, and it became very. I mean, it added an extra layer of darkness, and uh, it also brings up like some uncomfortable moments in my own adolescence, as did This Is England. Like I would say I was more bullied than a bully, but as I say, sometimes the one who is bullied becomes a bully and preys on the
Hmm.
weaker
Sure.
person, or at least remains silent when bullying is
Right.
taking place, Like
Yeah.
I I did some things I wasn't proud of, and I was also probably more times the victim of hazing and that kind of thing, bullying of some sort, or I don't know. Sometimes it is just playful and it's not meant to be taken too seriously, but often it is hurtful, especially I guess it's I guess it's true with among mean girls too, but I think it's probably more prevalent among adolescent boys, like I think the people I grew up with were fucking monsters, and I was probably one of them too. And these movies remind me of that and how fucking stupid I was, and crude, and uh,
Kids can be mean, that's for sure.
yeah. And it makes me ashamed, and it makes me ashamed of like things that I did to other kids, and it makes me feel shame for things that were done to me, and the way I didn't fight back at certain times and didn't stand up for myself. Um, it's
Okay.
just yeah, it brings up a lot of. I think that's one reason it's powerful. Like many people can relate to this on some level,
Yeah. Yeah.
as being among the bullied, or you know, being among the bullies, or both, probably.
Right. I guess I wanted to add another anecdote from Shane Meadows' personal life. So he's very close with the main actor, uh, Patty Considine, and they co-wrote it, as we said. And
Yes.
when they decided to collaborate, they found this theme in common, which was horrible atrocities happening in small town UK and kind of never seeing the light of day as far as like publicity goes. So the kind of dark things that can happen and that they wanted to shed light on. Um, so in a sense, maybe the film is just by showcasing this, it's like just it's trying to be kind of journalistic in a way and
Yeah. Well, there's
speaking
very
up for
much
these
a
communities.
there's very much a documentary feel to it, even in the way it's organized: day one, day two, day
Right.
three, day four. So I appreciate that aspect of it. And there's like the shaky handheld cam. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then this all of this violence is juxtaposed with the beautiful English countryside. I was reminded of the Blakean phrase, England's green and pleasant land. I kept thinking of that as I would see the the landscapes that we would see from time to time. And then there are the overcast skies and the rain. It's very England. This is England too.
Should we, speaking of titles, should we discuss this title a little bit?
Uh, yes, please, because I have no idea what it means. Whose shoes?
I don't either. So I watched one video essay today on a YouTube channel. I'll just quickly plug just so that they get credit for this thought. It's just Brother Nero. Uh, but anyway, he ends this very long video essay with with these two sentences. In the end, there are no heroes, there are no villains, nobody wins, no justice is served. All that is left is Mark, walking away, bloody, wearing a dead man's shoes. So I don't know how he's actually wearing a dead man's shoes. I don't exactly understand what this guy's getting at, but I think his main point is that Mark is the one who is going to have to live with all the carnage. Like he's going to be the living representative, right, of this whole legacy of violence.
He's wearing a dead man's shoes. Does he take Richard's shoes?
No, that's what I'm saying. Obviously, it's going to be metaphorical, but the point is, he's the one who's choosing to try to live in normal society and live on after all this shit has taken place, right? So he's the only like living witness now, right? To Anthony's death, to the deaths of all of his former mates, and now to the death of Richard. So in that sense, he's going to be wearing the dead man's shoes.
He's dead man walking.
Yeah. But seriously, like is that
Well, that's what they. You
convincing?
know where that phrase comes from? Dead man walking. You didn't see the film, but do you know
I assume it's something about like being on death row.
that when the prisoner is walking to the electric chair, you know, that's what they
Okay.
say. Dead man walking, and
Oh, really?
yeah. So that's what one does in dead man's shoes, I guess. So Mark is the dead man walking in this case. He's the one
But
that
he's not
walks
walking to
away.
his death.
Well, eventually he is. We're all doing that, right? Uh
Yeah, but I mean, this guy was suggesting that it's unlikely that Mark's going to be able to keep it together after this. I don't know what you think,
so
or
he's
if
like
it's
he's
even
like
particularly
he's
interesting.
like cursed from all this.
Yeah.
What
By the
did
way,
you think
speaking of
about?
like,
What did you think about this?
okay,
This was an interesting line when Richard. I don't know if this was premeditated or not. My feeling is that he had a change of heart there in that castle in the little space where Anthony hanged himself. Um, and he decides he wants Mark to kill him. Do you think that was his plan all along, or that was a decision he made on the spur of the moment?
well, if you were like me, then we definitely weren't sure how that scene was going to end at any point. So even when Richard started egging Mark on, you still thought maybe it's
A
there's kind of just
trick.
a tease there. Yeah, just like it was with
Just
Herbie.
exactly. Yeah. He's like, "Oh, you're a good man. You're a good man. I gave you
Yeah,
my word, didn't I?" Yeah, I
right.
thought back to that scene too. But then he becomes more and more desperate, almost pleading with him to the point where he says, "Let me make sure I get the line right. Stick it in me, please,"
Mm.
which has a an oddly homoerotic quality to it, doesn't it? Stick it in me, please.
Well, considering I teach 14-year-old boys, yeah, I'm able to. Yeah, I think that immediately, but yeah, I didn't notice that as I was watching.
I mean,
But
it was
yeah, as
pretty.
far as whether it is premeditated or not, I think it's an interesting question. I don't have an answer. I think both are possible because it's like, on one hand, it's like all his killings are so orchestrally perfectly planned, that it
Well,
seems
are
like planning
they?
is about is.
Are they? What about
Well,
the?
otherwise, he seems like he's so ready for everything before it happens,
But
right?
see again, this I wanted to ask about this. All right, we're thinking of him as avenging angel. Is there something supernatural about him? There were two instances in particular when I thought this is not even believable. This is not realistic. The first is the confrontation with Sonny on the street, right? Sonny gets in his face and says, "You're not afraid of me, are you?" And he's like, "No." But look at them face to face. Like, Sonny is fucking huge. And
By the way,
Richard,
he's an ex boxer in real life.
exactly, exactly. And he looks it, right? And Richard, okay, he's been in the military, but does he look like a tough guy? I mean,
I mean,
maybe he knows some martial arts or something. And, but he, it seems like Sonny could just punch him in the face and knock him out.
but you know what I wrote down when I was watching that is just like the power of determination and conviction, because like
Okay, so we
I've
give
been
it.
in those shoes
I
where
understand.
I'm, yes, I was someone who was more bullied for sure than I was bullied, but there were, if I was pissed off enough, like
Right.
I didn't care, I wasn't scared. So I
Right.
just
I
feel
know.
like that's, yeah,
Okay. So leave that one aside. I said that was
okay,
the first instance. But
okay,
the
okay.
second instance is when they go out to the farm or whatever
Yeah,
it
maybe
is.
I'm gonna have the same idea, maybe.
And, and, he's just like, yeah, come on. They have a fucking rifle.
Right.
And it's purely by accident that he doesn't get shot and the other guy gets shot in the head. Like, how
So I
the
think
fuck
there,
is he supernatural? Like, he's completely fearless. Like,
no, there are different interpretations.
that
Let me
seems
throw some different
reckless.
ideas at you.
All
I'll throw
right,
some different suggestions at you.
all right.
One is that, well, what I heard is that like they only had one bullet.
Yes,
Like that's why they left.
but
I
how
didn't
does he
realize that at
know
the
that?
time.
How does he know
Sure,
that?
of course. I'm just saying that's so, because initially I was like, well, if they have more bullets, why aren't they just taking another shot? But so I mean that, and is it just because he's such a powerful presence? And the other, I guess maybe the other explanation is just that he's so on edge he doesn't give a shit. Like if he dies. fuck it.
Right.
Like
But
he's still gonna go out with that level of like intensity and fearlessness,
I know,
whatever
but it
happens.
seems like a stupid thing to do when he's only on number two, one down, right? And then number two, he puts himself in that situation. That it seems like that would be if he were strategic about it, and he's got all this military training, right? Like he's going to take out everyone else before he puts himself in such a potentially dangerous situation. So
I think that's a good point.
this adds to
I
that
had the same idea.
this adds to that feeling of unreality.
He's protected, or he's protected by his like just cause.
Yeah, which I like. I that's not a negative. I like the fact that it is realistic, but then there's this dreamlike quality too, and there's this feeling of unreality, and almost like it's a spiritual allegory.
Tom mentioned that the scene, we didn't talk much about the film because I was like, I didn't want to get too influenced by his
Right.
connection to the film, but we briefly discussed the scene where Richard puts together the nice drug cocktail, and he found that scene the hardest to accept because he said like the main drug in that period and space and time would have been speed, which speed was one of the drugs that I think he found, but he didn't think that there would like acid would have been such a potent ingredient. So he just like he wishes that yeah, he just had trouble believing that kind of that sequence, but
Well, that yeah,
whatever.
there's a an interesting message. I guess you could call it a message that the film has when I think about that line that Richard says to Anthony. He's like, you know why people give kids drugs so
Mm.
they can control them or something like that. It's like it's almost like an anti-drug
Yeah, I had the same reaction.
diatribe, and it's like
Right.
you could see how someone might say, "Oh, the message of one of the messages of this film is drugs are bad," but of course that doesn't consider set and setting, right? Like if yeah, if you're giving someone acid so you can fucking torture them like the CIA does, of course it's going to be terrible. There's going to be a bad trip, but psychedelics have many
For sure.
beneficial effects. As I hope we'll discuss eventually when we consider Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind.
Mm.
But so you picked up on that too. It's like a very simplistic. You could come away with like a simplistic interpretation of what it's saying about drug use.
Another element that we haven't mentioned yet is, well, I guess we did mention it. Yeah, just how big a factor PTSD may have been in the main character, but we kind of did touch on that. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, are there any other major plot points or themes that you were? I guess here's a little tiny piece of trivia. Maybe you probably already know this, being the erudite scholar that you are. But when the first graffiti was painted on the flat, on
Chain
Sunny's flat, I
stoking.
think. Yeah, so you know what that means, yeah?
It's end of life breathing, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I looked
Okay,
it up too. Yeah, I didn't know.
okay,
I
yeah.
was like, what is that?
I didn't know if it was a name of someone or something.
I think it's called
Okay, I just
Chain Stokes breathing, and then he, you know, used the phrase chain stoking, which is that I think the. Do you think those guys knew what the fuck that meant? Probably
yeah,
not. So that
exactly. So
so
that's
the
why I thought it was a bit
yeah,
strange.
so the strange but the strangeness of the phrase there probably added to the terror. It's like, what the
That's
fuck? This
true.
guy shows up in a gas mask and then he writes chain stoking. What's that? What's going on here?
Red rum, red rum, red rum, red
Yeah.
rum. Um, well, I want to. something I guess another thought that I had as I was watching is like, I don't know. Do you think Richard wanted these guys to have any periods of remorse or self reflection? Because I think I was kind of frustrated that I didn't see more of that from the main characters as their doom was approaching. It's like it, they were. I mean, maybe that's just human nature, and we just don't often feel that guilty about shit, and we're more concerned with self preservation. So in that, so that's why. But I mean, I just was hoping maybe for a bit more self reflection, more, more an emphasis on realizing what they had done to Anthony,
I
and
think
like
they see it. I think they see it. There are those moments when they're like, "Fuck, fuck, oh fuck." They
it
know.
is, but it doesn't reach any real satisfying level of depth. I felt, it's still
Well, you want them
it
to
wasn't.
have
I
like
don't
a
know. I wanted more.
Raskolnikov moment where they fall on their knees and
I
ask
guess
for
so.
redemption.
I mean, Mark felt it, and we felt it from Mark, and maybe that's why he's ultimately spared. But I don't know. Some of these other guys, yeah, just. What about Sonny? Like,
Well, he's the
are we
biggest.
gonna?
He's the biggest piece of shit. Obviously,
Yeah,
you
but are we
know.
gonna attempt to like three dimensionalize that and say, oh, this guy's probably someone who's suffered a shitload in his life to get to this monstrous level? Because probably that's the case, right?
Sure.
He's. I'm just
Yeah,
saying
that's there. There's always a story behind something like that,
and that's conveniently avoided.
but it's hard to feel much sympathy for him. You know.
Well, it's hard to feel much sympathy when we don't get any of his biography, but that's very purposeful, and that's what I'm saying. Stuff like that is a little bit cheap in a way, I would say. Like I wouldn't make a film with a villain that I don't allow to voice their story a little bit, you know? Just wouldn't be I wouldn't be satisfied with that.
Well, but there's nuance, I think, in the. Uh, I mentioned his charisma. You know, like he's the
He's
ring.
not that charismatic
He's the
though.
but to those dumb fucks, he is like he's the ringleader, and I guess he's handsome. He's well built. So a guy like that, he's kind of an alpha male, right? So he naturally attracts followers.
Yeah, I'm just saying if we want to try to represent truth with art, you kind of got to grapple with Sonny's story too, right? If you really want to give like a holistic impression of
Well,
how
again,
violence comes to be.
again, I think the first, I don't know, half hour or first 20 minutes of the movie humanized that group. It's kind of the reverse. It's like we sort of like them. I mean, didn't you find
Sort
those?
of. It's not very
I,
likable.
I know,
Not
but
likable in the same way like train spotting characters are.
no, but just their banter. It's amusing, and the way
It was
they
alright.
the way
It was
they the
alright.
way they react to the clown face painting, and the
Remind me. Oh, they're just because they laugh about it in a
yeah,
way.
and they're like blaming each other, like you did this to me. No, no, it was the guy in the gas mask, and one guy has knob spelled NOB painted with a target on his fucking jacket on the back.
Oh, that's what that meant. I didn't get what that was. I just saw like NB and I was like, what?
I think it said NOB
That
rather
makes
than
more. Yeah, it
rather
makes
than
more sense what
K
that meant.
KNOB, but
Right. I mean, I thought the most humanizing scene was like when Herbie was getting high, and they were, then he like sniffed the Parmesan cheese
yeah. So it's
as a like
moments
Coke
it's
replacement.
moments like that where you know I feel like they are humanized to a certain extent, and then
But you don't
then
agree with
the
me then
the
about Sunny
deeper
at all?
the deeper we get into the film, the darker it becomes, and the less sympathetic we are because we see the horrible things that they did.
But you don't agree with me that we should know how Sunny became the way he is?
Okay, fine, but maybe
I
just
don't know. I'm not trying to like batter you into
maybe
submission with that
I
point, but
I I've known so many pieces of shit like him. Personally, I just don't like dudes like that. I think
Of
they're
course,
fucking
neither do I.
toxic.
But of course they are. I'm just saying, but they're not enjoying their lives, and they've most likely had a really dark childhoods filled with violence and not much tenderness. That's usually the case. So
Well,
so for them to become the target of our like hate and our like gratification when they die, that feels cheap because we're not seeing that person as a human being who's suffered
it's
and
like
to get
that.
to that
It's
point.
like that Russian film. Come see the what's it called? Come see the
Come and see.
come and see. Yeah, you remember the Russian soldier uh, can't bring himself to shoot the baby picture of Hitler, or the picture of Hitler as a baby. Remember that?
I don't remember
There's a
exactly.
picture of Hitler as a baby, and so like the most evil
Right, right,
the
right.
most evil person was always an innocent babe at one point in history, but you know
Oh, that's the point I'm gonna latch on to, I think.
hmm okay,
You
well,
know.
I latch on to him threatening the mentally challenged boy with sexual abuse, suck my cock, or what's the alternative he gives him?
Or mystery prize or something like
Mystery
that, right?
prize, and he
Mystery.
he like throws water on his head or something, so
Yeah, he punches him in the head.
knocks him out,
He
and
knocks him
and then
out.
he
Yeah.
throws I don't know if it's boiling water or
Water.
water,
Yeah.
so that's my memory of him. And uh I it's hard for me to summon the human empathy or sympathy, but
I'm not even trying to claim that it's like some great empathy. It's more just like about wanting to, wanting to include that intellectually. It's
hmm
just intellectually for me that I want to know that I want that to be included.
yeah, well,
But anyway, should we? Any last parting thoughts? Is this a good time to do that?
what
Any
final
final?
thoughts?
Yeah, should we jump to final thoughts? Final
Yeah,
thoughts. Final thoughts.
yes,
Okay.
we should, because we're bumping up on an hour 10.
Oh, I know what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Sorry, it's a quick one, but another parallel I made very early on was Of Mice and Men. Right? Did you think about
Okay.
that?
No, I didn't, but that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. A great book, by the way, and like
Well,
times like that where I'm happy to be a high school English teacher, because like when I get to
right.
teach a text like that, which is a great book in my opinion.
Well, I made more cinematic connections. It reminded me of, I mentioned Rolling Thunder, of course, already, but it also reminded me of the Korean Revenge trilogy,
Oh boy,
Old Boy,
yeah,
Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, and Sympathy for Lady Vengeance.
hmm
Um, which is a great,
yeah, and that
great
kind of
trilogy.
operatic monk monk inspired music towards the end, really elevated that revenge as a sacrament almost, right?
In
In this movie, because the
in
movie
this
for the
movie,
most part was this kind of very low key folk music,
well,
and
it's
then
it's
suddenly you
like
get this
it's like
like
90s, it's like 90s freak folk or lo-fi folk, indie punk folk. It's there's we could talk about the soundtrack, but there's a Bill
I got to
Cal.
shout out one of the bands. They're called Calexico, and they're from Tucson.
Okay, I didn't recognize
So,
them, but I did recognize the Bill Callahan song at the beginning.
okay,
Bill Callahan and Smog, and then at the end
Smog, yeah.
there's a Will Oldham song. I think that's the last song. Um, Bonnie Prince Billy or Will Oldham. So yeah, that created a certain vibe. But what was I talking about? Oh, the other cinematic connections. In some ways, it's like a Clint Eastwood movie, like a Dirty Harry, or have you seen Gran Torino or
No, I'm not really familiar with his
Unforgiven?
repertoire too much. With his oeuvre.
It's classic revenge movies.
We also didn't talk about um, the way that Richard characterizes. We didn't really get into it. The fact that Richard sort of confesses to Mark in a way that he has seen his brother as a spastic and
We did mention
a
that.
nuisance. We mentioned it, but we didn't really explore it. So I don't know, like,
Yeah, so
because when I
that's
was
what
watching that, I
I said. You know, we could maybe assume that okay, he felt guilty about that, and this is his way
yeah,
of atoning. But we
right.
could also say that he never really did care that much, and all of this was an excuse to commit the violence.
Well, and I just wonder, like, yeah, how what the nature of his relationship with his brother was, right? Because on the one hand, first, there's a couple ways I can look at that. One is that we get the all the shots of them interacting in the fantasy, where he seems like a very good brother,
Yes.
right? So that's one vision that we have. Then we have him saying, calling his brother a spastics and like making fun of him, imitating him, parodying him, and then we wonder, well, what kind of brother was he? But maybe he's also being especially hard on himself. Maybe he's being too hard on himself.
That's
So maybe
also
he was actually
possible.
somewhere in between,
And
you know?
again, I think this all of this ambiguity makes it a better film because it really challenges
Yeah,
us to it's holding up a mirror, it's causing us to reflect on ourselves. Like if we
yeah,
had such a brother, how would we behave? Would
right.
we idealize it? Oh, we always like took walks together in the fields, and we spent our afternoons just talking and laughing and hanging out. Maybe all of that was just fantasy in retrospect,
Right.
right? Maybe what he says at the end is more accurate. He was embarrassed. He didn't stand up for him. He didn't protect him. He abandoned him in a way by going to the military and leaving him
And I
there.
think we even have clues in the things he says in their interactions that their relationship was less than perfect. He says stuff like, "You were the only one who didn't hold my hand," or "I didn't hold your hand." Do you remember that? Like so Anthony was like reminiscing about some of their times together, like him coming and playing football, winning a race. But we got these little clues that from the beginning, perhaps Richard was like demanding some distance,
Mm-hmm.
and not allowing him to like to be seen too much in public
Well,
together.
Richard is a three-dimensional character too.
Right.
There's he's. I mean, he reminds me in a way of Woody from the
From Toy Story.
from This Is England, um, who is kind of the older brother, protector, mentor to Sean.
Yeah.
There's a parallel there as well, I think. But yeah, we're almost on a minute,
Okay, then
an
I
hour,
know, but like
an hour
I have
15.
I gotta ask another question. Quick
Yeah, yeah.
question though.
Final. Let's go.
Yeah, final question. So again, you're gonna give the both and answer, and that's fine. But do something besides the both and answer. Like, tell me, like land on one side more, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If you can. So the two possible interpretations of Anthony existing in the first part, I would say, like some critics will be like, oh, the fact that he's hallucinating Anthony, and you can already tell where I stand just from the way I'm like characterizing this opinion, but the fact that he's hallucinating Anthony, it just is further evidence that he's out of his mind, that he's like a psychotic person. Whereas I kind of feel like it's more. It doesn't even really matter whether he was there or not. Like I don't see that so much as like a mental psychosis and more like a cinematic device just to show us the a way for us to see the relationship between the two of them. So I guess I'm saying in a way Anthony was more real in that first part than some people might think.
Well,
What do you think?
again, I think that adds to the spiritual dimension of the film, or I've been using the phrase religious allegory. I don't know if that's
You've been reading
accurate.
Milton.
Maybe it's more dreamlike, hallucinatory. Um,
Hmm.
I like that. I don't know what am I supposed to vote
Okay.
on? Like
No, but I guess would you
I
agree with me
don't
then? It's
think
not
it's
really just a
I
just like
no, it's not like, oh, therefore he's insane. No, no, no. That's too simplistic.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, Mark, do you want to preview our next episode? I think you've got something lined up.
Okay, well, the next episode, which will be the 19th of season 2, the next to last episode of season 2, will finally take a break after
No, you've been dying for that.
episode 20, but episode 19 will be the text for episode 19 will be an episode of the great British sitcom Faulty Towers. Um, John Cleese of Monty Python fame has decided to reboot Faulty Towers after saying for many years he would never do that. So, not sure what's going on there. But also, he is apparently touring this part of the world, and he will be in Taipei July 4th. And I'm thinking about going to his show. It's called The Late John
Nice.
Cleese. So I think
My
he's.
dad seems to think that John Cleese has gone off the deep end a little bit with
I'm
some
not.
conservative views.
I'm not surprised to hear that. He's very. I'm not surprised to hear that your dad feels that way. But I think it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say.
For sure.
He has definitely been an outspoken critic of the so-called cancel culture, and fair play to him for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess if it's more of like, yeah, I want to see what he says before I make a judgment.
Well, you've never
Because I have when my dad says stuff like that, yeah, I am like, maybe that's gonna make me like him more, or
right,
not.
right.
But there's a good
Well, you've
chance.
never
Yeah.
seen Faulty Towers, right?
No.
Okay. So this is a very important show to me for reasons I'll discuss in the next episode. There are 12 episodes total. There were 2 seasons,
Oh wow,
six
that's it.
six episodes per season. Yeah, that's one of the things that made it so special. It's like they stopped and they swore for years they'd never make another episode, but maybe the temptation was too great to make some more money and
Okay, and you're
bring
gonna
his daughter into it.
highlight one episode,
I'm
right,
gonna
for
pick
us
I'm
to
gonna pick
watch.
one episode that will focus on. I'm rewatching them again now. I'm almost finished. It's probably the 5th time I've seen all 12 episodes, but I'll pick the one that I think will, you know, generate the most interesting conversation.
Nice. Thanks again to friend of the show Tom for this request. We found it very fruitful topic for discussion, and yeah, always appreciate you guys giving us a request to talk about and being part of the texting community.
Yep, I enjoyed it. Good film. I recommend it. I don't know that I'll watch it again anytime soon because I don't. Well, I guess I do enjoy being kicked in the balls in this
Aiden said he's going to watch Pokemon tonight as an
figuratively.
antidote.
Yeah, you can't overdo it, you know.
Exactly.
All right, until next time.
Peace out, bro.
Farewell.